I don't want to ever hear about that again, Barnacle. Joining us now on Capitol Hill, Republican Senator from Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, and in Washington, NBC News Chief White House correspondent and political director and host of Daily Rundown, Chuck Todd, and the moderator of Meet the Press, David Gregory. And here on set, former governor of Vermont and former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Howard Dean. And Joe, thank God that you were on location because, well, he could flip the table. We could have a table-flipping round table.
It's happened before, Mika. I suspect it's going to happen again. Let's go to Pat Toomey. Senator, we just had Mitt Romney on, and the governor and former Republican candidate for president said he supported raising the minimum wage because Republicans are about good jobs and good wages. This past week, Rick Santorum's come on, former Pennsylvania senator. He supports raising the minimum wage. Former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty also supports raising the minimum wage. Where do you stand on that issue?
I disagree with those folks. Agree with a large majority of Republicans, many others. Joe, you know, I think you understand. We want higher wages, we want better jobs, but we also want more jobs. If the government comes along and issues a fiat and picks an arbitrary number and says employers have to pay someone at least that amount, well, there's some people who are at the low end of the skill spectrum, maybe have never worked before, maybe it's a teenager who's needs a first opportunity. They're not able to produce at that level. They simply won't get the job. So the CBO, this isn't just my theory, the CBO said that if we went ahead with the Democrat proposed increase in the minimum wage, the best estimate is we'd lose 500,000 jobs as a result. And I'm not going to support a policy that's going to price 500,000 people out of the job force.
David Gregory?
Senator, I guess a follow-up to that, understanding that you and others may think, look, let's improve our jobs picture before we take a look at the minimum wage. What about the argument that for a lot of the working poor who want to work, who want to provide for their families, that they're simply not able to make it? You look in Washington, D.C. alone. If you have real challenges with regard to transportation or for housing, that you simply can't make it on a wage at this particular time. As a conservative, do you worry in that case that that lower income workers are then draining the resources of government even further because they're frankly not earning what a lot of people would call a livable wage?
Well, there's no question, David. We have many very extensive programs to help people cope when their income is, you know, at low levels. And if their income were higher, then the government would spend less in these areas. The question is, how do you get there? I don't think you get there by issuing an edict from Washington to make it happen. As I say, you just price people out of the workforce. That's much worse for those people and for the federal budget. I think the way you do it is you have a vibrant economy that is demanding ever more workers and putting upward pressure on wages so that people get raises. That's the answer.
Chuck Todd, I think it's interesting that we have seen Governor Romney, Rick Santorum, also Tim Pawlenty, and some other Republicans starting to come out in support of raising the minimum wage. Do you think there may be a compromise that's worked on in Washington, D.C., and we may end up at a $8.30, $8.50, maybe even $9 an hour minimum wage increase?
Well, Joe, you and I have talked about this all week. I've been surprised that isn't there, and I find it intriguing that the three most prominent Republicans that are supporting the raising of the minimum wage are three guys that spent a lot of time on the campaign trail, three guys that, you know, were having a campaign in blue states and purple states on that front. So I guess, Senator Toomey, let me ask you this. It doesn't sound like you're for a minimum wage, a national mandated minimum wage. Would you, well, if there hadn't been one, I mean, where are you on this?
Yeah, look, the question before us is, do we increase from the current level? You know, obviously, if you don't increase the minimum wage over long periods of time, since we generally have inflation and not deflation, then it becomes irrelevant, and it's not something that matters.
We haven't increased it in years. One of the longest periods without an increase.
That's right. And if we do, we're going to put some people out of work. So I guess the question is, who are we to make the decision that we're going to give a raise to some people at the expense of destroying the jobs of other people? I don't think that's a good call for government to be making. I think instead we ought to be creating more demand for workers, more jobs, and as I said before, the upward pressure on wages that comes with that.
So you would get rid of the minimum wage? You wouldn't have a
that's an
federally
irrelevant
mandated
discussion.
minimum wage.
The question before us is, do we raise the minimum wage? And I think that would do harm. So I'm not going to support that.
Senator Toomey, on another issue, we had Governor Mitt Romney on last block, and he very carefully and articulately made the case for fundraising off of the Benghazi issue, and he said if Republicans have questions about this and they want to get elected so they can continue to raise these issues, that it is okay. Do you think it is okay to raise money off the Benghazi probe and the questions surrounding what happened there?
I don't know, Mika. I haven't given that much thought. My fundraising, I don't make any references to Benghazi in that. I think that's. I think we got to be really careful that doesn't get politicized. I mean, I think the response of the administration was a political response, and that's a real problem. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of what's happened, and that's why I think the House's action this week is constructive. I'd be very careful myself. In fact, not sure it's a good idea to fundraise on the basis of those mistakes of the administration.
Okay.
Yeah, and of course, Trey Gowdy agrees with you, and he came out forcefully, said it yesterday. He was undercut by the NRCC. I suspect that probably is not going to happen again. Let me ask you, though, about obviously Keystone is a critical issue right now. The debate continues to rage. We had the Canada's ambassador to the United States yesterday quoting the State Department report, talking about all the jobs it would create and why it's important for the United States. I want to bring it closer to home, though, because you can look at what's happened in Pennsylvania over the past several years and look what's not happened in New York State over the past couple of years, because Andrew Cuomo refuses to allow innovation and energy in New York State, and people aren't getting jobs because of it. Talk about how fracking in Pennsylvania has made a big difference to working class people there.
Well, Joe, you're absolutely right. By the way, there's a fascinating map that's come out by the Census Bureau, and it shows every county in America that has had an increase in median wages. Every single county fits into one of two categories. It's either Washington, D.C., or it's an energy-producing county. And that's in Pennsylvania. Natural gas is changing our economy. It's the direct benefits in the areas, and they're localized, but those areas in which the drilling is occurring. But it's the availability of incredibly affordable, low-cost, clean natural gas. I've been at groundbreaking ceremonies of manufacturers that are bringing work back from China to Pennsylvania, in part because the advantage we have with low-cost natural gas is just transformative. It's unbelievable to me that some places like New York would not choose to take advantage of this opportunity, but frankly, it's really working for us in Pennsylvania.
Hey, Howard Dean, I want to talk to you about this energy issue on a larger scale. Democrats obviously have to be very careful. They certainly are concerned about the environment. Their base more concerned about the environment than, let's say, the middle of America, if you just look at polls. How do Democrats balance this moving forward, where they want to be a part of the energy revolution, they want to help the working class, it may be help like some people in Pennsylvania, but also they have to worry about the environment? It seems like actually a pretty fine line that they have to tread.
One of the fastest growing energy industries is solar. The number of solar installers has gone up dramatically. But I've got an interesting question for Senator Toomey. You don't want Washington interfering in setting a minimum wage, but the Republicans in Washington, particularly in the House, don't seem to have any problem giving tax breaks to, which is our money, tax breaks to oil companies, tax breaks to Wall Street. How do you rationalize government intervention to help the largest corporations in the country and in the world at our expense, and you won't let people who are making $8.25 support their family with a little raise in the minimum wage?
I'm not sure there's anybody in Washington that's been more outspoken than I've been about having a tax code that stops picking in winners and losers. We've got a tax code that's a total disaster. Some of the worst and most egregious offenses are in the area you just mentioned. Huge taxpayer subsidies for solar energy, for wind energy. You wouldn't have windmills if it weren't for taxpayer subsidies. So in committee, I sit on the Finance Committee that has jurisdiction over the tax code. I offered an amendment to wipe out those subsidies. It's not good for our economy. I don't support it.
Governor Dean, I was watching you during the intense questioning of Senator Toomey. I felt badly for you because your head seemed about to explode. But you sat there quietly.
I did.
You referenced the tax code. You referenced minimum wage. The Keystone Pipeline has been discussed. I would like to ask you about financing, potentially financing, one of what I think is the greatest issues confronting this country, the rebuilding of America. We just had a rainstorm last week and roads collapsed.
This is actually something that Senator Toomey and I may have some agreement on. I actually think most of the infrastructure in this country is going to be built by public-private partnership from now on. The federal government doesn't have any money that they ought to be spending. The states don't have money that they ought to be spending. There are ways to do this. You can build railroads with public financing if you use real estate to do it. So I think we've got to be a lot more imaginative. I think there are ideas on the left and ideas on the right that can migrate towards the center if their respective sponsors would be willing to give in a few things, and we could make things like public-private partnerships work for building infrastructure.
Senator Toomey, jump in here. Can you agree with him on anything here?
We might find some agreement here. I've got to be careful, my goodness. But no.
I promise not to endorse you, Senator.
Thank you. But, I would just add one thing. I think, with road construction in particular, it's one example that seems obvious to me. When we create new capacity, it needs to be tolled. Why would you build a new road and not put a toll on it? It's just we don't generate the kind of revenue from gas taxes that we used to. This is a user fee, a toll is, and if it's new capacity that didn't exist before, give people a choice. If they want to ride on that, let them pay a very small amount to cover the maintenance and the cost of the construction. The technology makes it easier than ever. I think there are ways we can be a little more innovative and get the funding we need.
I want to bring up our political experts now. If we can actually get John Heilman and Chuck Todd and David Gregory up on the screen, I want to ask him a question because I think it was absolutely fascinating, the interview with Mitt Romney. John Heilman, what I heard Mitt Romney say in response to your question is not what I've been hearing in New Hampshire, not what I've been hearing in South Carolina, not what I've been hearing across America. There are people that believe Mitt Romney is going to run in 2016 I would have to say one of the top Republican strategists over the past 20 years told me yesterday he thinks Romney's in. What are you hearing, John?
Well, I think the likelihood that Mitt Romney will run is very, very low. And although I joked about the Ann Romney thing with him, I think that's a big part of the reason. I really don't think she has the stomach for it. And I don't particularly think he's interested. There's no doubt that there's a group of people who worked for Mitt Romney and who are big supporters of Mitt Romney who are talking about it and talking it up in a lot of places. And because there's such a vacuum right now in terms of there not really being a front runner in the party that usually has one by now, that talk gets more traction than it would ordinarily. Chuck, let me follow on from that. Chuck, let me ask you a question about the same issue. Governor Romney mentioned a bunch of names of people he liked, and just goes to the vacuum issue. And in order, I think he mentioned Jeb Bush, or Paul Ryan, Chris Christie, Jeb Bush, and Rob Portman. None of those four people, all four of those people may not run for president. So what does it say about the state of the Republican Party that the last nominees' top four picks are all people who might not get into the race?
Well, that is exactly the point I was going to make, John, is that I assume Romney's not going to do this. Everything you hear about his family, from what I've understood in talking to people, indicates what you indicate, is that there's just not he just doesn't have the family support to do this again. But you look at who he mentioned, and Walker's the only guy that he mentioned that may end up running in this list. The other four, you could easily picture scenarios where none of the other four end up running. Portman's somebody that really hasn't been making many moves at all. I think it's interesting that he sort of inserted him into the list. And don't forget Mitt Romney's description of what he's looking for, right? The practical conservative, an interesting adjective to put in front of conservative there. I have a feeling that Romney is going to be this shadow, sort of the way Gore and Hillary hovered over the 04 field a little bit for a little while. Romney may hover over that field for a while, particularly if there isn't a big establishment name sucking up all the oxygen early, that you will have these constant rumors, the way that Christie sort of hovered over the field for a little while when Romney struggled.
David Gregory, if Jeb Bush isn't in the race and if Chris Christie isn't in the race, I'm hearing people talk about the fact that Romney may be a lot closer to this than some people think. What are you hearing? What do you think Romney in 16?
Well, I agree that he has the prospect to hover over the race, and he'll do that by doing interviews like he's done this morning, by staying relevant, by staying critical of the administration and trying to position the party. He, beyond his personal wealth, has the ability to raise money. He's got the name recognition. I think the biggest reason against it is not just his family, but he's proven to be flawed, fatally so, as a candidate, not once but twice. I don't think you reinvent yourself politically in a way that somehow the party rallies around you or the country rallies around you. So I think that's the big problem. I also think that the party right now is still hanging back. There are some of these key figures, Jeb Bush, principal among them, hanging back, not feeling any need to commit too early to jumping into the fray with all of that entails. So I think there's a number of figures who want to just see how things play out, and then they're going to then they'll move up. But there's no question about this, Joe, and you've talked about it a lot. There is a certain amount of, waiting for Superman, waiting for Jeb Bush. Does he have the stomach for it? That practical conservative idea, the one who can sort of bring it all together. Right now, I'd have to say it feels like Jeb Bush is the one wearing that hat, but people are worried about whether he really wants it.
All right. Our thanks to Senator Pat Toomey. Thanks for being on the show this morning.
Thank you, Pat.
Todd, we're going to watch you on the Daily Round.
Oh, by the way, breaking news here. I think Howard Dean is planning to go to Pennsylvania to endorse Pat Toomey.
Come to Philadelphia, Howard. Let's do it.
He just tried to flip the table, but it's nailed into the ground.
There we go.
So we're good.
Dean Toomey 2016.
That's disturbing.
Or Toomey Dean 2016.
Chuck, we'll see you at 9 a.m. David Gregory, Howard Dean, thank you so much. Good to see you both. Donnie, thanks to you too, I guess. Still ahead. An exclusive coming up, how swing voters